back to the 832 podcast, and today we're going to be covering some of the more scientific claims against Christianity in our series of apologetics. And today we've got Pastor Brent Vicars from Legacy Church Canton Campus today joining us in our discussion. So how are you today, Brent?
I am stellar. How are you, Ethan? Thank you for having me on the podcast.
You're welcome. You've become a bit of a regular now. Like after you're
I feel like
I don't know, 3 or 4 episodes, you kind of become a regular on the show.
I feel that way. Matter of fact, I had someone who has nothing to do with our church who was looking up something online, and this is a person from like I went to high school with, and they're like, "Yeah, I've really enjoyed being on the podcast." And I was like our church podcast, no, the 832 podcast. I watched it the other day, and I was like, oh, well, there you go. All right, right on. Well, it was really interesting.
We were actually talking when I called you to get you on today. We talked a little about another instance of that, and of course, after the phone call, I looked you up on the Google, and I actually saw
the Google. Nice.
And I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think the 832 podcast shows up like 4th in my
I know.
In my stream.
This is really neat.
So yeah, obviously I'm a regular, and it's great to be back on the show. So yeah.
All right. So the first claim I kind of wanted to tackle today was I needed to see how it was originally phrased.
Well, anytime I get to talk about Jesus and Christianity and faith and answer kids' questions or adults' questions for that matter is a good day to me. So hit me with something.
All right. So this objection, this claim, since miracles contradict science, they cannot be true. I think this is a neat conversation because we one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about this is because when I think of like science and stuff, you're one of the pastors that comes to mind. And since miracles contradict science, they can't exist. And one of the arguments for miracles that I've come across is that the evidence, like for the resurrection, for example, there's more evidence saying that it did happen because of events afterwards.
Right.
So it makes more sense that Jesus was
right.
resurrected than it wasn't. And
right.
the conversations I wanted to talk about was one of the biggest miracles, which was the start of creation.
Sure.
Today, because all of this, there's a lot of things that say it makes more sense that the creation starting was by an intelligent creator, and that this was a miracle.
Well, I love this topic because it's something that I struggled with. I was not always a Christian, and certainly had times in my life when my question. And sorry, I was getting a cell phone call during your podcast. That's the way my world works. But I've always been a student of science. I would not say I'm a scientist. I have a degree in religion, but I'm a nerd. I'll just be honest. I went straight up kid who went to space camp when he was in middle school. Nerd. I mean, just hardcore. Matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, had the chance to go to the Space and Rocket Center, and I was like, yes, let's talk about the Apollo moon landings because that is awesome. And I love science. I think science is there, not. Well, here, let's put it this way. Most people think that there is a war between science and religion. And number one, if we believe that God is the creator of the universe, for us Christians, there is no war then, because God then created science. And you're not afraid of things that you create. So when people are just like, oh, my goodness, science disproves religion or whatever. No, science exists to prove the creation of the science exists to prove God. That's what science is there for. Science is there to give us a bigger understanding of God's amazing glory. This last week, I had the chance to go to the beach with my family, and the second night we were there was one of those just crystal clear nights. And I've got my little tracker app on my phone. Did I mention I'm a nerd? That you can point up to the sky and it tells you what's constellations and everything like that. And I was sitting there explaining to my kids that God put all these stars, all these universes, in the galaxy, and then at some point decided that, what, right over here, I need a sun, and I need to wrap some planets around it, and we're going to put this little rock right at just the right distance from the sun, so it's not too hot, not too cold. It's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears all of a sudden, kind of moment. And you and I were talking about this the other day on our phone call, that most solar systems have two stars, and then there's planets. If there's planets in the solar system, we are a single star system, which makes us actually kind of an anomaly. And then you get, like I said, that little rock that's rotating just at the right spot, and then God's like, well, here, let me create these things in my image upon it. And just, to me, the relationship between religion and science is not one of adversary. It's one of symmetry, and it's one of it's symbiosis, really, because it's something where natural understanding of the natural world and of the universe or whatever, and religion aren't at war. They're just two different things, but they exist to kind of prove each other. Matter of fact, Roger Bacon, who is the man who is described who's often credited, I guess, with the creating the scientific method, was a Franciscan friar. He was a religious man, but he created what we call the scientific method. And so when you look at it, I mean, science doesn't have to be at war with faith at all. Matter of fact, like I said, science is there to prove faith, at least in Brent's mind. So, but that, I am off on a wild tangent. I'm not even answering your questions. I'm just ranting at this point. So I apologize. That's not good podcast material.
We're all about conversation. So.
Now, tell me some of your specific questions, and let's kind of dissect some of those.
Well, I wanted to talk specifically about let's talk about the Christian creation story. And I did a bit of reading on this. Specifically, one thing I read was Genesis 1, a scientific perspective written by Hugh Ross, PhD.
Okay.
Gnarly dude. He's literally, he is a scientist who has looked at this. He's an astrophysicist, ? I'm pretty sure.
That's okay.
And so he looks at this, and he has this whole pamphlet is basically talking about how the biblical creation story is the most scientifically accurate, given if we were to look at like days, like day 1, day 2,
right?
Not as literally 24 hours,
right?
But instead periods of time that started and ended. Yeah,
Ethan, my entire life, I've heard the Genesis story. I mean, from the time I was like in little children's church, and then later like Veggie Tales, which I'm too old for Veggie Tales, by the way, but I've seen, because some things are just good. The whole idea that God created the earth in 7 days, and we get so stuck in our own little minds. It's, well, 7 days has to be 24 hours because that's what my day looks like. Well, number one, what defines a day? The rising of the setting of the sun, right?
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. We would both agree with that, right?
Yes.
Does the rising and the setting of the sun ever change? Well, sure. Some days it's a little later in the day, or it's all about how the earth rotates around the sun and how the earth's rotating itself and everything like that. But when you think about it, if you really process the idea, what is the measurement of time? Well, that's just something men put together in their idea so that we could have a way to define where we are right now and where we are. So like for us, like we're recording this podcast at like 2 something in the afternoon on a Thursday. Well, what defines 2 o'clock? We did. God didn't. I mean, right?
Right.
What defines it as Thursday?
I can't say the verse, but I've heard of one that says like a year is 1,000 days and 1,000 years.
Yes, and exactly. And so when people are just like, oh, God made the world in 7 days, and on the seventh day he rested, so that must be Sunday, and we'll take Sunday as our Sabbath day. Those are all great things. And for the Jewish scholars at the moment, when they were going from being people of the land, when they were kicked out of their homeland, and they were going from people of the land where they had told kind of a verbal tradition for generations and generations. That's how their history of the Jewish people were passed down. All of a sudden, they're kicked out of the land, so they can't be people of the land anymore. So they said, well, what we need to do is write down our tradition and write down our understanding of the world, so that if we can't be people of the land, we will be people of the book, which is how you get the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, if you will, which is also the Torah, and blah, 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 blah. But they were trying their best to understand their world. Well, how long did it take for God to create the world? I don't know. How about a week? I mean, it could have been that simple. But what is a week to God? A week could be 1,000,000 years. We have no concept in our little brains, that little 3 pounds of stuff up in the top of our heads, time is a concept that we completely created. Well, like you said, I'm wanting to Google that scripture right now, because I know exactly which one you're talking about. I cannot remember where it is. But that to God, a day could be 1,000 years. Well, what if it's 1,000,000 years? And honestly, why is that a problem? Just because it's not to the exact point that you described, or that men have defined? Is that the issue? They're all, oh, well then, gosh, religion and science can't work because
it's like, so is the problem that it's not a term that we defined, and how we think the world was made couldn't have happened in 7 24-hour days,
right? And I just have, for me personally, that's never been a struggle for me. For me to look at it, well, what's a day to God? What if a day to God is 100,000,000 years? Because he's God and he created it. And yes, we're trying to define it, but I don't think God's up there going, oh my goodness, boy, I hope they don't understand that. I mean, I don't think God's up there worried about this at all. So, it's you're trying to define something based on solar cycles that we understand here on Earth, and it's just like, okay, that's a man-made creation. So, why are we and besides that, how about, let me throw it to you just this way. If we as Christians believe that God is the creator of the universe, why are we making him so small? Why are we saying, oh my goodness, he couldn't have created the world in 7 days? Really? Because he's God. I'm pretty sure he could do it. And he could probably use a big explosion to do it, because I'll tell you what, if I could create something awesome and amazing by blowing it up, I would totally do that. And if I'm made in God's image, I bet he's cool with it too. Right? Right?
And I think
now,
for a lot of specifically with what Hugh Ross was saying, it wasn't necessarily that God couldn't have done what he did in 7 days, but how we understand it, it makes sense that how we understand the universe working and how we've seen other planets form, how it's described in Genesis is fairly accurate. It's
fairly accurate. Yeah.
It says Genesis 1 verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and people can kind of maybe misconstrue that and think just earth and sky and stuff, but in the context, the Hebrew words, that means the totality of existence. Right.
The totality of existence.
And yes. Hugh Ross likes to he put it so that, and then the rest, because chapter 1 verse 1 Genesis was just totality of the universe. Everything after that is written from the perspective, the point of view on Earth, watching creation being made.
Right.
And so and then everything else, when God, let's look at this. Right, now the earth was formless and empty, darkness covered the surface of the watery depths. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And so God saw that the light was good. We see planets form, and we do see that they're liquid and stuff. Mm-hmm. And they had an opaque atmosphere. So that means light didn't get through. That doesn't mean light, like electromagnetic whatever's
Right. Right.
It's that on the point of view that this is made, we couldn't see it yet.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
we could see it because it eventually atmospheres turn translucent and then transparent.
and when you think about the totalitarity of time, you know what? Yes, we're talking about solar cycles here on Earth, but you're not. But when we're talking about God created a universe, the little bitty solar cycles here on Earth, boy, that's a pretty narrow-minded kind of arrogant thinking that, okay, everything has to be defined exactly by what's here on Earth because that's where I live. What? No. If God's everywhere, yeah, he seems to like Earth a lot, but I don't think everything has to be defined by our little minute understanding of science. Matter of fact, as science has increased, and as our understanding of the world has increased, especially over, I mean, you think over the last 150 years, the difference in our understanding of the universe from the late 1870s to now. I mean, all of a sudden we understand that there's bacteria in the world, that there's DNA, that we've put people on a different planet. Whether you consider the moon a different planet or not, we put dudes on rockets and shot them up there and they walked around. So there have been men on the earth who have not been on Earth. We got people sitting in satellites, or not in satellites, but in space stations and satellites above the earth and all this kind of stuff. Our understanding of the universe, even since like 1950, in the last 70 years, has grown exponentially, but yet we still understand so very little. And I tell you what, during this whole COVID situation, I think we've seen that very evident. Matter of fact, I was talking with one of my kids the other day that we are watching the scientific method in day-to-day true life right now. Because the scientific method is you get a hypothesis and then you try experimentation, then you look for conclusions, and then sometime along the way it gets proven. Well, we're watching the whole world go through that with COVID right now. That what makes it happen? How do people get it? How do we avoid it? What do we do? All this kind of stuff. And I'll tell you what, the scientific method is messy. And there's a lot of failure involved with it. And there's a lot of misturns and mistakes and going, you know what, this is right for right now, but this doesn't work now, it doesn't work later. And we're watching that in kind of real form. And I'll tell you what, it makes people really, really, really uncomfortable. Because what we want is absolute truth, and we want to know this is truth and 100%. And the problem is when we look at science and religion, there's religious truths and scientific truths. You and I talked about this the other day, and there's other faiths around the world that believe that you can have a religious truth and a scientific truth, and that both are true, and that's okay. I think where we get stuck, especially in Christianity sometimes, is we think the relationship between religion and science has to be constantly at odds, as opposed to going, well, you know what, this is a spiritual truth and this is a scientific truth, and they're both true. They may not meld perfectly together, but you can have two things that are true at the same time, and they don't absolutely have to agree, and for something to still be true. We get very black and white when we talk about this. And the more I study God and the more I study faith and grace, God works in a lot of grays too. There's some things that are black and white, but he seems to be a fan of gray as well. So you and I talked about this in our phone call the other day. One of the best statements I heard in college when it came to understanding religion, and I was taking science classes and religious classes at the same time. And one of my philosophy professors, who was an atheist, it was just like, so many people try to use the Bible as a science book. Well, it's a terrible science book. It's horrible as a science book. It's also a bad geography book, not a great history book. It's a book of theology. It's a book to understand God. That's its purpose. And if you try to use it for something else, it's kind of like if you try to use a math book as a history book. It doesn't work that well. It's not meant to be those things. Or if you try to use a physics book to explain astronomy to somebody. Yeah, there's some correlations, but it really doesn't work that well. We get in trouble when we try to take the Bible and say, okay, well, we're going to use this to define science, and because it's not meant to be a science book. It's a book of theology. It's a book to help us understand God. But when we do understand God, we start looking at the world through science, through both scientific eyes and the eyes of faith, dude, your eyes just get, if you can't look up at the stars in the sky or look at the intricacies of a flower and go, my goodness, there had to be a creator in this. How could something this beautiful happen by random? You know, for me, that's a leap that I can't make. That's a much harder leap for me to believe that there is no creator and there's no governing hand, kind of pushing things forward. That's a lot harder leap for me as a human being, not even as a believer or as a pastor, as a human being, to believe that nothing was there, then all of a sudden nothing exploded, which that doesn't make any sense. Because if that's the case, why isn't nothing exploding right now? Because that would make your days a whole lot more exciting, wouldn't they? If nothing was around you and all of a sudden nothing just went boom. But it's at the same time, it's like we try to make it so difficult. We try to make it so hard because we want those absolute truths that our little brains can handle. And there's one thing I know, well, I should say, I'm going to quote the movie Rudy, which you probably haven't seen because you're young and I'm old. Got it. Okay, cool. There's a pastor in the movie Rudy. He says, I know two things for true in the world. He's like, number one, that there is a God, and number two, that I'm not him. And I've quoted that and used that statement so many times in my ministry life because I know that there is a God and I know I'm not him. And I also know as a third that I don't understand everything that God does, because did I mention that I'm not God? I'm just Brent. Brent's a nice guy, but he's not God. I'm sorry, I'm totally on a long tangent there. I apologize.
One of the things you were talking about was the complexity of life and the complexity of everything, and that was the next point. One of the objections that we have is evolution explains life, therefore we don't need a God. And we talked about this earlier, and it's used a lot. The argument, like, can a tornado go through a junkyard and just accidentally create a working Ferrari? Or I think Lee Strobel, in his interview, it was like a Boeing 757 or something.
Right. Yeah, that's the case for Christ. Yeah. Lee Strobel's case for Christ. Yeah, that's one of my favorite analogies whenever I've talked to someone who's just like, well, I believe that, we all evolved from like single cell organisms. I was like, wow, that's a leap. And you're saying that all happened by luck and random happenstance. That is the tornado flying over a junkyard and assembling a working car. That's just as logical then. And anytime I've ever brought that up, they're like, well, no, a tornado can't fly over and build a working running car. I was like, then why would you think random happenstance would create, I don't know, us? I do believe in adaptation, which is the understanding that, people and animals will change over time. I think that's very well evident in the fossil record as well.
That is precisely what Darwin found when he was on the Galapagos.
Oh, yeah.
Also how there's white people and black people and Asian people.
Yeah.
Clearly, that's evidence just in interactions with other humans. What we don't agree with like I think some have used the term neo-Darwinism or macroevolution, where a single cell organism turned into a multicellular organism and gained complexity. And one thing with organisms and stuff is that they have to replicate, and when they replicate, they make the same thing. When bacteria replicates, they're making a copy of themselves.
Right.
When animals and humans not replicate, but
I know what you meant. I knew where you were heading. Yeah.
We merge and then whatever. But we still, that's how adaptation happens, but that does not, we haven't seen a case where that adds complexity. One thing Darwin even said was something about if there's evidence that an organ is present that could not have been evolved through thousands, millions, however many years of adaptations, then that really hurts my theory. Not words, but essentially that. So yeah,
you're paraphrasing because I've read that statement too, I think. But your intent is absolutely correct. Yeah. I think what we see in we tend to be such visual people, and if we can't see it, taste it, smell it, then obviously if it doesn't fit in those boxes, that we think, well, this doesn't exist. And the problem with God is that that's not exactly how he works. And when you were talking earlier, and we haven't really touched on this too much about like miracles and in science, what, 150 years ago or 1,000 years ago, if someone was cured of a disease or an illness or whatever, people would have called that a miracle. Nowadays we go, well, their body fought off the antibody, developed antibodies, or they fought off the bacteria, or they were given drugs allowed to do this and everything like that. Honestly, I still look at things like that as miracles. If God gave someone the knowledge to create a vaccine or an antibiotic or a medication that would cure someone's or help someone deal with a symptom or something like that, how's that still not a miracle? Yes, it's science, but God gave that person an inspiration in their brain to create this thing that out of the blue can then change someone else's life for the better. The definition of miracle is very broad. You know what I mean? Is a miracle simply, something that happens that was good that can't be explained, or if it's something that happens that was good that we can explain, but at the same time, isn't life a miracle? I mean, I'm a dad. I got two beautiful kids, and I'll tell you what, at both the days of their birth, I know that's science, but I'll tell you what, it's a miracle too.
Or because there's so many things that go into that, like just
oh my gosh,
normal life. It's just so many things that go into that to cultivate into this moment that finally, wow, this finally came and it worked.
Well, not only that, but something came out, and then it's like then it's a person, and they're going to have thoughts and ideas, and this little 3 pounds of jelly that's in our skulls, which still trips me out, because if you didn't know anything about human thought, if you were an alien coming to the earth and dissecting a human being, you'd be like, I don't know what that does, because it doesn't seem to be that important. It doesn't move blood around. It doesn't make the air thing move. It doesn't seem to filter anything. It's just there. Maybe it's just there to hold the space. And for some people, that seems to be the case. It's just there to hold the space. But I digress. No, I'm kidding. I'm sure everybody's smart in their own way. But I'm just being silly. But seriously though, if the nature of a human being is in their brain, it's in their heart, it's in their soul, and then we have these ethereal things like heart and soul, not just our physical heart that pumps the blood, but like our soul and what makes us us. And that, dude, that is an absolute miracle. And if true evolution was happening, then why doesn't my dog talk to me? Because it's had time. Why does my cat seem to still, just be a cat? Why? It's had time to develop dog-like tendencies. It's seen dogs. Come on. But we look at it and we go, well, let's just put it this way, if you change your perspective and you start looking at every day as what it is, it's a miracle. I've said it so many times in sermons and in meetings with people the last couple of months, especially through COVID and the pandemic and people being locked down. They're just like, every day is so hard. All these things are changing. People losing jobs and people get sick and everything like that. And I was like, well, if you're here and you're listening to me, then your track record for surviving the problems of your life is congratulations, 100%. You got some skills at doing this. You might just make it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. When we look at that, you know what? If you're here and you're listening and you and I are getting to have this conversation, how's this not a miracle right now? It really is. Miracles are defined by how you understand your view of the world, and sometimes that's as simple as the miracle that we woke up today, because we didn't have to. There's miracles every day. You just got to be willing to look for it, and you got to open your eyes to it, and don't let science and technology distract us from the fact that all science and technology is there to help us understand God in a bigger way.
Right, and
you know.
like the more we've understood science, this is neat because for a while people thought that the universe just always existed, which doesn't make sense because if the universe always existed and this macroevolution and evolution stuff is true, then we should all be perfect because
Yeah.
given that it's an infinite amount of time, we should have no problems.
Right.
But now that we have a better understanding of stars and that they have a lifetime, that helps.
They have a lifespan.
And the universe had to start, and this is where we kind of come back to the creation and origin of life and existence of creation, because it makes when we further our understanding of science, like astrophysicists like Hugh Ross, there is more and more evidence that points strongly in the Case for Faith interview, I think, it said that it's not just strong evidence, or I'm paraphrasing, it's not strong, it's compelling evidence.
Right.
There is an intelligent creator because of all the things, like we said earlier, just normal life, there's already a lot of things that have to go into that. For the creation of life, like origin, there are so many things to go into that because you have to get the right chemicals together. Then those chemicals have to come together to create amino acids. The right amino acids have to come together to create proteins. So many things. And it's not hard if there's something intelligent putting it.
Right. Putting it together. Yes.
And that's the whole thing. So.
Well, I'm going to get a little weird and scientific on you, but isn't that what this podcast is about? We're cool. Yeah. When I was in college, you take physics classes and we studied the laws of thermodynamics. Okay. And I'm going to read you that definition because I had to look it up because I can paraphrase it, but it's better if I actually give it to you. And it says it defines the physical qualities of things such as temperature, energy, entropy, which is the constant state of decay. And basically the laws of thermodynamics are laws. And there's a difference between a theory of evolution or a theory of this and a law. A law is something that we all agree on that, yes, that is true, and it works every time. So the law of gravity says that if I take this pen and drop it, it's going to hit my desk every time. Because I'm on Earth, I'll stop because that's annoying on a podcast. But for real, the law of thermodynamics, the laws of we agree that there's a law of gravity. We can agree that Newton's laws of motion are active and work. The first law of thermodynamics is it says that it basically says that energy, when it passes in and out of a system or whatever, it has to define itself under those laws. So it's like if energy, it's basically saying that energy and mass and matter and things like that can be manipulated, but they can never be complete. They can never be destroyed. And I explained this, somebody a piece of wood. Like if you're going to burn wood in your fireplace, that wood has a caloric value, a unit of heat that it can generate because of the cells and the way combustion works and all that kind of stuff. So but when the wood burns, it releases its caloric value. But did the wood disappear? No, it turned into what? It turned into heat. It turned into ash. It turned into carbon. Basically, it went up in smoke and particulates in the air. So the wood didn't disappear. It didn't vaporize. It just simply changed form. The first law of thermodynamics basically says that energy and matter or whatever cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed. Right. So if it can't be created and destroyed, then where did it come from? Right. And if that's a law of science, now we have a problem.
Right. So, now we have to go that's a natural law, and now we have to look towards a supernatural law, which is
a supernatural law. And for the believer, that's an easy question to answer. Well, if matter cannot be destroyed or energy cannot be destroyed or created, it has to come from somewhere. Where did it come from? Well, for me as a believer, it goes, well, that's where God comes into play, because remember the Big Bang thing? You know, he created the universe because he's God and can create it. You can't tell me that nothing was there and then nothing exploded and created the world and created the universe. That does not seem to work with the laws of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics is that everything is kind of moving. Okay, and I'm paraphrasing poorly, and someone's going to research this and go, that's not what it says at all. They're right. But I'm paraphrasing poorly, like I said. But the second law of thermodynamics basically says that everything is moving. And if you look at our universe, you know, if you look at it from the point, well, they're like, well, it started with the Big Bang. You're right. And everything has been moving out since then. And every year, the Earth and the Moon get a little farther apart. It's not much. I mean, it's minutia, but it still happens. Every year we get a little farther from the sun. Every year the universe expands. Well, if that doesn't prove that everything started from an explosion pushing out, I don't know what does. And number two, if we all agree that then there was nothing and then nothing exploded, well, if that doesn't define that there was a creator who said, wait a minute, we can do, all of a sudden we're there. You know, we're there. Now, the third law of thermodynamics talks about temperature getting to absolute zero. Not really important in this conversation, but there is a third law of thermodynamics, and other ones have been suggested, but they're not lost. But I think when we look at the laws of science and we try to make them butt up against the law, not laws of religion, but the concepts of in religion and miracles in religion and everything like that, I think we make it too difficult, you know? I've always been kind of a pastor who believes in the kind of the KISS principle, if you know what I mean. Keep it simple, stupid. You know what I mean? And even when it comes to my faith and stuff, and a lot of people, they're like, well, I need to know more. I need to know more. I need to know more. I get that. And so study, but don't just listen to the things that tickle your ears. Because if all you ever do is listen to the same rhetoric or the same podcast or the same information that makes you think, well, that's what I believe, so it's okay. No, one of the things I've done throughout my ministry career is I look at both sides. I talk to atheists. I've talked to folks of different faiths. I've gone around the world and talked to people of different faiths. And I look at their understandings, and sometimes their understandings of their faith, I was like, woo, we as Christians should probably talk about that a little bit, because these folks, and they may believe something different, but they believe it with their whole hearts because they've thought about it and they've really processed it. You know what I mean? I think we can put a whole lot of emphasis on science, and we should. Science is created by God, therefore it is beautiful and wonderful, and it's there to help prove not only God's existence, but God's glory. And I think we can, but we also should remember that that when we study the Bible, we're looking at a book of theology and understanding God's heart, because the heart is very different than understanding just the mechanics. Lots of people can understand the mechanics of how a computer works or how even a person works. You know, how do we take foodstuffs that taste good so that we want to eat it and put it in our stomach and it becomes electrical impulses and makes our body work? I mean, that's when you think about just the human body and how we operate. Number one, you think, wow, we're really inefficient because we require like sleep and food all the time. Water, goodness sakes, we're a pain. We are a pain in the butt. But we're also pretty amazing that we can take food, water, and just all of a sudden create art and music and everything else. I'm like, God knows what he's doing, man. And we're just over here like, you know, let's put it this way, if there wasn't a creator, if there wasn't somebody divinely behind, you know, pushing us forward with their hand behind us kind of thing, why haven't we heard an amazing symphony from the horses of the world or the alligators of the world or anything else? Or why is, you know, I've seen elephants occasionally paint, but I really don't think they're really doing like portraits. You know what I'm saying? They're just kind of slapping around, or, you know, with a paintbrush or whatever. God gave it to us as people to be able to understand him in a bigger way. And we can question it all we want, but it still doesn't, for me, it doesn't change anything in my heart or anything, my understanding. Not only is there a God, but science is there to prove that he exists.
Okay. So I think to kind of sum up what we've gone over in response to miracles can't exist because they contradict science. To sum that up, basically, like with the miracle of the origin of creation and life, there's a lot more evidence that it happened.
Oh, yeah.
think God did it,
Yeah.
that God did it, than not. Just like there's a lot more evidence that Christ did resurrect because of sequential events afterwards.
Yeah, and we didn't really talk about that for a moment, but again, I heard a professor years ago who basically, when you talk about the evidence behind Christ, resurrecting and everything, that you had disciples who were following Jesus, and only one lived to old age. That was John. Everybody else met just terrible deaths, beheadings, crucified upside down, boiled in oil kind of things. I mean, just multiple crucifixions, stoned to death, all these terrible ways to die. People don't tend to die for a lie.
Right, and that is a big thing that I've read in Case for Faith, Case for Christ. That is a big thing that they do say. It's like, if this didn't happen, why were people willing to die horrible deaths for it?
Yeah, and well, here's another thought along this line. Hey, Ethan, did you hear about that thing that happened in that little Middle Eastern town about 2 weeks ago with a guy, and there was a thing, and he was upset and he got hurt? Did you hear about that?
No.
No, of course you didn't. Even with the modern day and age, do you know everything that's going on around the world?
No.
Of course not. Even with modern technology, and we know more about what's going on the other side of the planet than ever in the history of mankind, because through social media and satellites and everything else. But yet you don't know what happened to that dude with the thing, and it was unfortunate. It was uncool, right? No, you don't know because it wasn't important enough to tell you. Well, Jesus was crucified 2,000 years ago, and it has changed the course of history. It has changed the course of the planet to the point where even when we've gone off the planet, we have people who are praying. We have people who sing worship songs. We have people who marvel at the universe. When we sent satellite, or I guess the Voyager probes, technically they're not really satellites, though. They're more explorer robot kind of things. But what do we include on there? Things like, in God we trust. It's a big enough deal that we print it on our money. It's a big enough deal that we print it on our license plates. What happened with Jesus 2,000 years ago should have been like, oh, wow, that dude who said he was a prophet and said he was the son of God, oh, he got killed.
All right, because there have been some other instances where people tried doing that stuff.
Absolutely. And well, there were other people walking around saying that they were the Messiah when Jesus was walking around saying he was the Messiah, which is why some people were like, that's not the Messiah, that's Joseph's boy, the carpenter. And that's the way, by the way, biblical people sound in my head when they're questioning Jesus. That's just the way they sound. I don't know why they sound like carnies from the 1920s, but they do. But yeah, the truth is there were other people walking around saying they were doing miracles and everything else, but only one of them came back. And that is big enough news that we're still talking about it, reading about it, and we have whole churches and videos and music and songs and stuff about it, and amazing podcasts led by Ethan. 2,000 years later, people don't die for a lie, and people don't keep talking about something that wasn't true.
Right. Exactly.
If that's not evidence enough for you, Right.
So to sum up, basically with miracles, it's like there's more evidence that it did happen because of a miracle than not because our conversation. And
I don't know if it's just our conversation, but some things just happen. Well, it's like I told you the other day. I've been in situations where I've seen people in the hospital that should have died, and talk to their doctors, talk to their nurses, and their chances are nothing. And they're like, we're doing everything we can, and we can't guarantee it. And I had an incident of 10 years ago or so where a person was they were in deep trouble. They the doctor was like, maybe a 10% chance of living through the night. And I asked the doctor out in the hallway, I was like, are you a man of faith? And he's like, I am. I was like, can I pray with you? He's like, absolutely. And then 30 something days later, I'm eating dinner with this guy having pie. And the doctors have said he shouldn't have made it through the first day, But yet 30 days later, we're at O'Charlie's, and I'm having the conversation with him going, you're supposed to be dead, and they can't tell you why. He's like, well, why do you think? I was like, because God wasn't done with you yet, and you need to take that and use it. That's what I call a miracle. And I've seen it so many times that I can't help but believe in them. So anyways, you keep summing up and I keep adding on. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I did sound like that with the last episode.
Yeah.
Because I realized now, and it was like, well, thanks for having me on the show. And it was like, but wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more.
So, yeah, I totally understand that. And
well, this is a great topic, and it's one that can't be really defined in we've been talking for about 45 minutes or so. You really can't define this in 45 minutes. I've been studying religion, as a pastor for 20 something years, and I still have lots of questions, and honestly, it's the folks who don't have questions that scare me. I think having questions about your faith and miracles and creation, everything like that are great, but research it and look at it from different perspectives. And don't be afraid if what you initially thought was different or wrong, or if in the end you're going, well, I don't understand because I don't know. Well, that's okay too. It's okay for us not to know. And I think one of the greatest things about our faith journey and our love of God and everything else is that we trust God to be in charge and not us. Because when we trust God to be in charge, it's okay to not know. It's okay for me not to have all the answers because God does. And since I follow him and he's in charge, right? Then I can still be okay with that. Now, I'm sure there are deeper and much more eloquent theologians that you could talk to, Ethan, to explain things. But this is my understanding of it.
We had a great conversation today. Would you mind praying us out?
I would be thrilled to. Father God, I just thank you for Ethan and Robbie and for the 832 podcast, and just for the not only the fun that it brings, but also just the deep conversation that can bring, and hopefully not only you're changing the way someone thinks, but also changing their heart and directing our hearts toward a closer and deeper and more fulfilled relationship with you. Lord, I thank you not only for your word to help us understand you better, but also the fact that you let us have science to understand the universe and understand the world around us. And it's there for your glory and it's there for your honor. And Lord, I praise you so much for allowing us to have a brain that we can sit here and ask these kind of questions. And even if we sit there and go, well, Lord, I don't know, that you're not up there wringing your hands going, oh my goodness, they're questioning me, that you're still in control and you're still guiding us and you still love us, even when we act like children. Lord, we love you. We praise you in all things and we give you the glory. Amen.